Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about 6 NBA players with the most to prove next season, because there are a lot of guys in the NBA that either didn't have a great year last year or are going into a pivotal season. And in today's video, I just kind of want to list those guys out, talk about what is on the line for them, because for a lot of them, there is a ton on the line going into next season. But really quickly, before we get started, if you enjoy content like this, then consider subscribing. I upload twice a day, every day for the most part, so it's a great place for consistent NBA content. And leaving a like rating is also a great way to let me know that you're enjoying that specific piece of content, and it helps it out a ton on YouTube as well, get out to more people. You can also come hang out with me at twitch.tv/spolo_TD outside of these videos. It's a great place to just kind of hang out, talk about basketball, talk about whatever. You can also do that in the Discord server as well, which is linked down in the description. So plenty of ways to interact with me as well as with the community, and I would encourage you to explore one or more of those options. But with all those things said, let's go and jump into the list. Okay, number one is one that gets talked about a lot, right? It's going to be Paul George. And this has even got to the point where Paul George has his own emote in my Twitch stream. We have a playoff P emote for when someone screws up, and it's warranted at this point. Like, this is a guy that quite simply just didn't get it done. And he isn't the only one to blame for the Clippers' woes in that Nuggets series or in the postseason in general. Like, I'm not going to sit here and act like if Paul George had played better, they would have won the series. It's not like he was the only one, right? But there's a couple of things on the line here for Paul George. One, his standing within the league. Like, if he doesn't play well next year, next postseason most specifically, people are going to just label him as a fraud, and they already have. Like, he has to kind of disprove that at this point for some people. His future as a Clipper, and he can decide to stay if he wants to, but if he doesn't do well this coming season, then maybe his future on a couple of different teams is a little bit murkier, and maybe if he does leave the Clippers and he tries to go somewhere else, it's not in the same role that he wants. And then just, his standing among the NBA community. Like, people are way down on Paul George right now, which is, it's not necessarily strange because he didn't perform well and he likes to, say things publicly that he doesn't necessarily back up. And the bubble is a tough environment, and I don't want to make it seem like, I'm piling on to Paul George. I'm mostly speaking from the perspective of other people at large, within the NBA community about Paul George and the fact that he's got a lot to prove to those people. So we'll kind of see what happens with Paul George moving forward. But when you're going into next year and you're making a list of players that have to prove something, I don't see how Paul George can't make that list. Next up now is the first of 2 players that are going to be returning from injury, 2 big-time players returning from injury next year. And the first is going to be John Wall. And there's a lot of pressure on kind of the performance of John Wall for next season as it relates to the Wizards and their plans moving forward. Because if John Wall comes back and is an all-star or an all-NBA caliber guy returning from the numerous injuries that he has had over the last couple of seasons, that changes a lot of things for Washington. Like, maybe they're not going into a complete rebuild. Maybe they're making the postseason next year. That's kind of what they're waiting to see on right now. That's why Bradley Beal hasn't been moved. That's why they're not, quote unquote, in a complete rebuild there in Washington. And, John Wall is going to be one of the highest paid players in the league over the next couple of seasons, whether, the Wizards like it or not. And he's got to kind of prove that he's worth that. He's got to prove that, he can come back from this type of injury, that really anybody can come back from that type of injury and be the same kind of player that they were beforehand, when they rely as much on athleticism and quickness as John Wall did, and, ideally will still do. So there's a lot on the line here. Like, if he comes back and doesn't look right, Bradley Beal's getting moved. The Wizards are going into a complete rebuild. They're going to do everything they can to move John Wall as well. But if he comes back and he looks like a good player, they might end up not necessarily making moves to try and push for anything like a top 4 seed in the East or anything, but they're going to keep doing what they're doing and kind of maintain a borderline playoff status if John Wall comes back. So a lot to prove for him next year. Next up now is the other player that's returning from a significant injury here. It's not Kevin Durant. It's Victor Oladipo. This is a guy that has been in a ton of rumors this offseason, where people are kind of trying to figure out, what does this guy want, right? Because there have been rumors coming out that say that he doesn't want to be in Indiana. And then he says himself, no, I want to stay. I don't want to leave. His trade value is pretty much an all-time low right now when you consider how poorly he looked, or how poorly he played, in the bubble in Orlando, returning from a significant leg injury. And again, it's similar to the Paul George thing. Like, his standing in the league is in question right now. People are like, was his All-NBA performance kind of a fluke from a couple of years ago? Or is he really that type of player and he's just struggling to return from an injury? So from a monetary standpoint, as a 2021 free agent, there's a ton on the line and a ton to prove for Victor Oladipo next year. In terms of his standing within the league, there's a ton on the line for Victor Oladipo next year as well. And for Indiana, like if Victor Oladipo doesn't look good next year, then they're probably going to look to trade him, maybe do some other things within this roster, and maybe some drastic changes coming there for the Pacers. They've already got a new coach, so maybe, they're looking at some kind of semi-rebuild situation there next year. So for Victor Oladipo, if he wants to make money, if he wants to stay in Indiana or have the option to go somewhere else and have really his choice of which team to go to next year, there's a ton on the line and a ton to prove for him going into next season. Next up now at numbers 4 and 5, these are two players that I swear they seem to make every single list video every time I make one, and it's Ben Simmons or Joel Embiid. We just talked about the other day about the fact that Daryl Morey is now there, Doc Rivers is now there, and they have switched up the front office, they've switched up the coaching staff now, and if it still doesn't work in Philadelphia, then you have to take a look at these two guys. You have to say, does the Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid thing work? And you might, when you first see them on this list, you might think that it's an entirely negative thing. It's really not. Like, when I say, they have things to prove, they could go out and prove that they're, one of the best 1-2 combinations in the East. They could prove that they're one of the more talented teams in the Eastern Conference, and that, they can be a real threat to make the conference finals and the finals. I still think that's a realistic possibility for the Sixers team if they come out and prove it. And if those two guys come out, if Embiid comes into next year and is just in the best shape of his entire life, and Ben Simmons has improved his perimeter jump shot, those guys can prove, hey, we're here to stay. We're not going anywhere. There's no crazy trades going down here. You guys need to pump the brakes and trying to tear this Philadelphia team apart because we are still as talented as we are. That's the statement that they can make next year. If they don't do that, I'm telling you, 18 to 24 months from now, one or maybe even both those guys are not going to be on the roster in Philadelphia anymore. It's pretty clear the path at this point. Everything there is really on a trial basis, whether it's Doc Rivers or Daryl Morey leading the front office or these two players. They've got about an 18-month window to prove what they're about, and if they don't prove what they're about correctly and really look good, there's going to be some big changes there in Philly. So as big as the last couple of seasons have felt for the Sixers, I think next year is going to feel even bigger. And last up now is maybe a surprising entry on this list, but I still think it's certainly deserving, and it's Trae Young of the Atlanta Hawks. And this is for a couple of reasons. One, there hasn't been a ton of help there in Atlanta. They haven't necessarily been trying to win games. I understand all those things, but still, the fact of the matter is Trae Young's basketball teams, the teams that Trae Young has been on, have not been winning. They have not been winning teams, and you can blame that on whoever you want to, but when you're the top guy, regardless of the circumstance, you're going to get blamed for that. That's just how it is. The other part of this is, of course, the Luka Doncic trade continues to hang over his head and over the head of this franchise. You can say everything positively that you want about Trae Young in terms of how good he is as a player and everything like that. The trade was still a mistake, and I will stand on that point for as long as anyone wants to try and argue it. As good of a player as Trae Young is, Luka Doncic is a future MVP. Maybe Trae Young will get one as well, but Luka is going to be one of the best players in the league for the next 10 years. I can almost guarantee it. And that is something that is going to continue to hang over his head unless he comes out next year and proves, you know what, I'm just as good as Luka. There's no reason we can't be winning 40 to 50 games in the Eastern Conference. Put some better players around me and I'll prove it. That's pretty much the mindset right now for Trae Young. And we'll see if that's actually the case. But if we're talking about a list of players, that have a lot to prove going into next year, I think Trae Young has a lot to prove in terms of how he can translate his big statistics into winning, how he can help his teammates improve, how he can help his team win basketball games, and how he can prove that, hey, maybe the Luka trade wasn't as much of a mistake as other people are thinking. And I don't want to take too much away from Trae Young. He's been an awesome player the first couple of years in the league. And the only reason he's compared too poorly to Luka is because Luka is absolutely incredible. And as I said, a future MVP guy. So we'll see what happens with Trae Young. We'll see what happens with the Atlanta Hawks, really. And that's kind of an extension you can make for every player on this list to this point, is not only these players have something to prove moving forward, but also these teams have something to prove moving forward as well. When you're talking about the Clippers, Wizards, Pacers, Sixers, and the Atlanta Hawks, I just realized that 4 of those teams are in the Eastern Conference on this list, by the way. What happens with their future and the future of their team, maybe not so much for the Hawks because Trae Young is going to stick around, but what happens for the future of their teams, specifically for those first 4, depends a lot on what these 5 players on those 4 teams come out and prove next year. And if they don't come out and show what they need to show, they might be on different teams. Their franchises might go in completely different directions. There's a ton on the line and to prove for these players, and that's why they made the list. And yeah, there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.